Hello and welcome. In this video we're going to look at how to synthesize kicks that are actually useful to use. I'm mainly going to be using Vital for this, but you can recreate this in Serum and Phaseplant as well with the techniques that I will be showing. So let's get into it. So what I've done here is I've just created a 1-bar loop with 8th notes on every beat at C1. And this is just to loop back, so when we start creating the kick sound in Vital, we've got something to listen back to. So the main way and most basic way that people create kick drums is usually by grabbing a sine wave and then applying some form of pitch envelope with an envelope generator here to the sine wave itself. So let's do that. And the next thing that will be added is some form of top end with white noise. And again using another envelope, but much shorter this time, applying that to the overall level of the noise. And if it's a little bit too high in pitch, just reducing the overall pitch here. And then after that maybe some compression. And a bit of a filter at the end. And that's usually as far as we go when it comes to sort of making the basics of a kick drum. But these kind of kicks aren't really that useful. It's not that they can't be used. They can be used in some form of house music or like older kind of 808 style music, but it's a really basic sounding kick. And if we compare this to an actual kick drum, you can hear that there's hardly any body or punch to the sound. We could go further and post-process this, but really the kick drum itself, if you don't have anything strong to work with initially, you can't, in a sense, polish a turd when it comes to making it sound as good as possible. So if we listen back to this audio kick hit, the main thing that we can notice is that there isn't really an audible pitch to it. Not that kick drums mustn't have a pitch at all, but this sounds a little bit more natural in how a kick drum would sound. So let's recreate that kind of thing using Vital. First thing that we're going to do to set this up is I'm going to bring the phase all the way down to 0. That's just to make sure that it always starts from the same phase point within the waveform. And then we're going to edit this sawtooth. And the easiest thing we can do is we can just clear and then draw in the first fundamental. So now that we have our sine wave, we can start building out our pitch envelopes. So we're actually going to use 2 pitch envelopes for this, one for the initial attack and then one for the main pitching of the actual overall body of the sound. And we're going to do this using the first 2 LFOs. So we're going to set this LFO to envelope mode and we're going to apply this to pitch of oscillator 1. And as you can hear right now with this shape, it's sweeping up in pitch. But let's correct that. We're going to set the tempo of this to an 8th note. Now with me setting the notation of the MIDI kicks to an 8th note, it's good to sort of have your envelopes at a similar speed. And the reason why I work at an 8th note is contextually within your music, you don't really want your kick drums to be any longer than an 8th note most of the time, usually all the way down to a 16th note. So that's why I've set this to an 8th note. And then to set this pitch attack, we just create a shape like that. And then we can extend or decrease the range of that attack as much as we want. Again, play around with this to taste for how long you want that pitch attack to be and how extreme you want it to be as well. Now we're going to create the second pitch envelope, which is going to get rid of that audible tone and pitch to the actual kick sound. So we're going to apply LFO2 again to the pitch, but on this second one, we're going to change it to bipolar mode. So it's going to start above the fundamental pitch, sweep down, and then below the fundamental pitch. Again, we set the tempo to an 8th note and set the mode to envelope mode. Now to make this easy for ourselves, we have the grid divisions here. Vertically, we have 8, and then horizontally, we have 1. So if we set this to 2, think of this middle line here as our 0 crossing point of the pitch. So anything above that middle line is positive pitch, and anything below it is negative pitch. And I can actually demonstrate that now if we just create some form of shape. As you can hear, it's starting above and then sweeping all the way down below the pitch. And this is where we can start to really shape the sound of the kick. And I would recommend when you're doing this and creating your own kick drum sound, spend some time doing it yourself. And as you can hear so far, I'm already getting into a really cool sounding kick drum sound that isn't overly tonal. Again, if we accentuate the positive pitch at the beginning here, it gives us a bit of more of a mid-body sounding kick. Or if we decrease it quite quickly, it gives us more of a deeper sounding kick drum. And if you want to reintroduce some of the tonal pitch to it, extend out this middle section and let it just hover on that fundamental pitch. But for now, I'm just going to set up how I want the kick drum to sound for the rest of the sound design. I think right now that's a pretty decent sounding pitch envelope. So the next thing we're going to look at is some loudness envelopes and adding some top end. And we're going to add some top end again with some white noise, as I showed in the previous way of how to make a very basic kick drum. And we're going to decrease the level of both the noise and this oscillator here. So now we shouldn't be able to hear anything at all. So the first thing we're going to set on another LFO, LFO3, is the oscillator 1 loudness envelope. I've just applied LFO3 to the level of oscillator 1. And again, setting a range of horizontally of 2, we can start by just shaping the loudness. And we can play this back while we're doing it as well. And again, set this to envelope and to the length of what the kick drum actually is. So in this case, an 8th note. Now at the moment you can't really hear how this is going to be accentuated, but when we get into the effects section with the compressor, having this kind of shape really accentuates the sort of punch and transient of the initial hit of the kick drum. And then lastly, we're going to add some white noise with envelope 2. So now we're moving to the envelopes instead this time, because when I start getting into the macros, I want to be able to increase or decrease how long the noise lasts for. So first of all, we're just going to bring the sustain down. We're going to decrease the decay, and this is all on envelope 2, and we're going to apply that to the level of the noise. And we're just going to decrease the range a little bit. And now you get to decide how long or short that noise level is on top. Again, we can decrease the range a little bit more. Another little tip as well to get rid of any sort of low end in the white noise is just open up a filter, apply it to the noise itself, and then increase with the high pass filter the frequency cutoff. So you can decide how much of the body of the white noise you want in the overall kick drum sound. And then the last thing that we can do for overall shaping of the loudness is if we come back to envelope 1, which is the main loudness envelope for the overall synth. If we bring the sustain down, if we bring the sustain down, we can see how long this kick drum is lasting for. And we can start shaping the decay to how long we want the kick drum to last for. And this is where we can make the kick drum really short or up to that 8th note length. Now I do recommend this shape instead of this shape, because it just allows us to retain most of the body of the kick drum. Another cool thing that we can do to really shape the tone of the kick drum is coming into the wavetable editor of this first oscillator, which is a sine wave right now. What we can do is we can keep the first one at a sine wave, we can set a middle point, and we can edit this one. Now you can see here we've got lots of random different phases. So if we keep the fundamental and add in a couple of harmonics right next to each other, just to sort of change the shape of this sine wave so it's a little bit not sine wave like, we've now created a sort of different tone for the kick drum. It's got a lot more body in the mids to it as well. And again, we can further shape this. And if we right click here, we can randomize these phase points. Just to keep getting different body sounds that we might like the sound of. And just to make sure that it always starts from that 0 point on the left, we can just take this first phase point underneath the fundamental and move it so it's always hitting on that middle line there. And we can create a third point as well at the end with a different shape. Again, randomize these phase points until we get a kick drum body sound that we quite like. Yeah, that one quite works for, I quite like the sound of that one. And again, just move that fundamental phase point so it always sits in the middle. And then lastly, we can blend between these three different sounds. So the first sine wave, the edited one, and the third edited sine wave. And we can actually now apply this to a macro so we can have different styles of, or sounds of tone of kick drum. Next, we can really shape the kick drum with some effects. Now that we've done all of the fundamentals to it, let's really shape it with the effects in Vital, in Serum, Phaseplant, whichever synth you're using. The techniques I'm applying here, you can apply with those synths as well. So firstly, I'm going to add a compressor, and imagine like as if we were using OTT. I'm just going to increase the attack all the way to maximum. Now, this unfortunately is starting to clip, so we're going to put a filter, and the way Vital is set up, the gain staging, the filter will make it quieter so it stops going above 0 dB within the synth. But you can hear instantly the difference in the sound. It really accentuates the mids, the low end, and a little bit of the highs as well. And we can start editing. I would recommend focusing on expanding the mid band and the low band the most, just to make sure we get the most out of the body and the low end of the kick drum. We can also apply an equalizer before this if we want to increase the mids even more. I would recommend going for a point around about 200 Hz. Think sort of the fundamental of where a snare drum usually is often a good point for where the kick drum body can be. And again, try the EQ before and after the compressor to see which sound you like most. We could introduce some more low end in the sub if we wanted to as well. But again, try not to push it too hard so we don't get into a sort of overblown sound unless that's specifically what you're going for. And the final thing we can add is some distortion. And we can use envelope 3. We can use this mainly for the attack. So if we apply this to envelope 3 and really shorten the decay down, and apply this to the drive, reducing the range, and then we can apply macro 2 to the range. So we can increase or decrease the strength of that distortion drive, which adds a lot more boldness to the kick drum as well. And again, we can move through the tone of the oscillator as well, which let's just rename that. And again, on another macro, if we just come back to the white noise, the decay of it, we can apply that to macro 3 as well. Just reduce the range so we really get the full extent of the macro. And then the final thing that we can do is we can apply to the filter on macro 4, just if we want to reduce the top end a little bit more. And now we have a really expressive kick drum that we can change the heaviness of the tone of it, how long the top end lasts for, and how dull we want the kick drum to sound as well. And then as a final point, we can come back and compare it to our original audio that we had as a kick drum and see if it's comparable in any way. Now really the extent of what we could do with this now is move into a little bit of post-processing, but the main body of what we've got with this kick drum, again we could shape these pitch envelopes a little bit more if we wanted to, but really we can now move into post-processing and actually really polish this sound up a lot more. So if we get something like the ODT, let's bring that in, we can shape those mids and lows again, and with the glue compressor set with soft clip, we can really accentuate that attack while bringing the threshold down and bringing the ratio up as well. So let's shape that with a little bit of post-processing. And then with the EQ in the middle, we can maybe notch the mids a little bit. I often recommend around 500 Hz is a good point. This just allows space for music to sit in. And again, let's just do an A-B. And now just with Vital and a little bit of post-processing, a multi-band compressor, a bit of EQ and a glue compressor at the end, we've got something that's comparable to a sample that you might have grabbed. And if we wanted to, we could duplicate this channel, we could freeze and flatten and render it down to audio, and now we have an audio kick that we can use. And if we compare, it's actually quite similar to what this sample was. Again, we can do a little bit more shaping as well, envelope wise, and let's have a listen back to it. Might want to shorten it down a little bit. So there we have it for this video. A little quick rundown on how to make more useful kick drums in a synthesizer like Vital. Again, all of these techniques can be applied in Serum and Phaseplant as well. I hope you found this useful. I hope you find it useful in your music making. And as always, until next time, God bless and goodbye.